What's up, weirdos? My name is Felicia. If you're new here and you like horror movies, go ahead and hit that subscribe button and we can hang out all the time. So if you didn't know, in the month of March, I'm reviewing all movies written and or directed by women, which I am so excited about. And we're starting it off with Raw from 2016. If you listen to my podcast, Sinister Sisters, Women in Horror, you would have heard Lauren talk about this movie in episode 2, and I hadn't seen it at that time, but now I have, and oh my god. So Raw is a French movie that was written and directed by Julia Ducournau, or something like that in French. So Raw follows our main character Justine, who is going to school to be a vet. She is a freshman, and so there are some hazing rituals that are pretty insane at this school, and through one of them she ends up triggering a desire to eat human flesh. Casual. So this movie is fully insane, like yes, cannibalism, but also so much more. So when this movie came out in 2016, there was a lot of reports of people like throwing up at the theater and passing out, and I will say I did gag twice, but I didn't pass out. Thank God. So overall, I really enjoyed this movie. It also found it hard to watch at parts, and I think that is due to the best thing about this movie is how realistic it is, like how grounded in reality it is. It's really like a drama that also has horror aspects to it. Like, even though there are these gore scenes and it's about cannibalism, there's no camp to sort of relieve the audience of this like crazy thing you're seeing. Like, you're just like forced to sit and watch these really excruciating scenes. So as Lauren talks about on the podcast, the writer and director Julia, she didn't really set out to make a horror film. She was more interested in exploring this thing that we find so repulsive, aka cannibalism, and humanizing it and taking something that, like, from society's point of view, there should be nothing relatable about, and making it relatable. And I felt that in this movie, which was what made it so horrifying, because it was this thing of like, I'm really watching a drama and I am so unsettled and disturbed by it, but at the same time I'm relating to the character, which is such a achievement of this film. Something this movie made me think about a lot, which I think is actually cool to talk about in the context of the films I'll be reviewing this month, is the male and female perspective behind the camera. Like, there are scenes in this movie of Justine either naked or like in her underwear, and it never feels sexualized in any way. It really just feels like of the everyday, which I think is really interesting to look at, because the camera being the tool to guide the audience of like how you're looking at a scene. If it had been filmed by someone else, those scenes could have been viewed very differently, but because they were filmed and they were directed by Julia in this way, that it just felt like a normal girl going through a daily task and then having to deal with this crazy thing, versus like us looking at her as a hot girl in a horror movie. Like, it was just such a different perspective that was really exciting for me to see. In that same vein, I'll also say that none of the horror in this movie is glamorized in any way, which I also thought was really interesting. Like, in terms of like the movie feeling really real and grounded, like all the blood stuff, a lot of times in horror movies, like sometimes blood is sexy, right? Like, that's sort of part of why we watch horror movies, is like blood and sex are sort of this thing that's going together. But in this movie, it's like the blood is scary and sad and unwanted. All the gore or like uncomfortable scenes in this movie are really raw, which I think like is like, so that's obviously the movie title, but I think it has multiple meanings in this movie of like, yes, raw meat, but also like the rawness of the characters and the storytelling in this way that is really fascinating to me. I think a really good example of this is the Bikini Wax moment. So there's a scene where the sister is giving Justine a bikini wax, and I feel like in most movies, whenever you see that, it's like, put on the wax, ow, rip, ah, everyone screams. But in this, it was like, we had to watch like the wax go on and the individual hairs like refusing to be pulled out. Like, it was so hard and uncomfortable to watch, and I was like, whoa, I am like feeling something right now. Do you know what I mean? That didn't take a jump scare. Let's go ahead and do some ratings, and then I'm gonna tell you like all the scenes I couldn't handle and talk a little bit about the ending. So for the scare, I'm giving it a 4. Like, I watched this movie alone and I was scared. Like, I was like disturbed, I was unsettled. Is that the same thing? I don't know. The gore gets a 5. It's a very gory movie. Not necessarily so gory in like the slasher sense of the word, but just gory and like there is a lot of blood and like excruciating gross out scenes that are really realistic. Cheese, so as I said earlier, there's not a lot of camp. I'm giving the cheese a 1. Like, yes, there are parts of the movie that are funny, or like there are lines that are funny, but it's not cheesy. And the overall, I'm giving it a 4. Like, I actually did have a hard time watching this movie and did have to turn away a few times. Did a couple of the eye covers, as you know I love to do, and I still loved it. Like, even through all that, like, I felt like I went through something when I watched this movie. Like, it was pretty intense. Okay, now these are some spoilers, so let's go through all the scenes I just couldn't handle. The number one. Throwing up the hair. There is something about when people are throwing up and there's hair in their mouth, it makes me so sick. Like, that was my first big gag moment, and she's like pulling the hair out of her mouth. I was like I could not take it. Next, I'll just say, like, anytime there was an animal on screen, I was very stressed out because I didn't know what was gonna happen to that animal, because the vet, like, there's a part where they have to like turn a horse upside down, and I was like, this is the scariest part. So, like, I was like, don't turn that horse upside down. Anyways, you need to calm down. One of the moments I also like had a hard time watching was she has this like, she gets this really intense rash when she sort of triggers this cannibalism. She eats meat and she gets this huge rash, and it looks so painful and icky. And then she is scratching it, and like the noise as she's scratching it is just like, it is so gross. Also, there was something about the finger eating moment that was hard for me. It's funny because like the other gore moments where there's a lot of blood, I like felt much more comfortable in, but something about her like eating the small finger and like all the little noises was just like really gross. But for some reason, like when there was more blood, I felt more comfortable. I don't know what's wrong with me. And now let's talk about the ending. So basically we find out at the end that this is a hereditary thing. So the sister has it, as we know pretty early on in the film, and then the mother also has it, and her dad like opens his shirt and shows he has all these like bite marks out of his chest, like pieces of missing flesh, and how it's like healed itself over and over again, like super gross. And that he's just been dealing with that with their mother for so long. And I'm just like, oh my God, like, how do you not prepare your kid for this? It sort of reminded me a little bit of like in Carrie, where like the mother doesn't tell her what her period is, and so she has to like find out in front of everyone. It sort of like had that vibe for me, where I was just like, you could have prepped her, like you could have had to talk with her and like prepared her in some way. So that was really stressful. Also like that the sister didn't say anything to her earlier. And like, did the mom and the sister talk about it? Like, I just don't know. But I think that's all my thoughts. So I really liked Raw. I thought it was such a cool movie. If you want to hear some more about the making of it and more about the director, then check out the Sinister Sisters Women in Horror podcast. I will link it down below. Lauren gives like a really cool in-depth talk about it. As I said, I am reviewing only movies written and or directed by women this month. So if you have suggestions or requests, please comment them down below, and I will see you in the next one. Have a nice screen. Bye.